In the years after the trials, history began to record John Shaw and Jeffrey Evans as convicted serial killers.
Irish Press, January 21st, 1983. Englishman Jeffrey Evans was attacked by a group of prisoners, one wielding a hammer, at Mountjoy Prison on Monday evening. Evans and his accomplice Shaw were convicted of the murder of Dublin girl Elizabeth Plunkett of Ringsend and Castlebar girl Mary Duffy.
Through the following decades, Shaw and Evans would occasionally feature in the news. But when they did, coverage suggested each of them had been convicted of all crimes against Mary and Elizabeth.
Irish Examiner, 24th November 2004. Serial killers unlikely to walk free. Fears that the state's only known serial killers could soon be set free.
And this was the narrative the Plunkett family always believed, that Shaw and Evans had been convicted of Elizabeth's murder. In 2009, Jeffrey Evans had a massive stroke which left him in a coma for 3 years.
Well, a chapter in one of the most notorious crimes ever committed in these islands closed in the last 24 hours with the death of Jeffrey Evans. John Evans killed a number of women.
When Jeffrey Evans died, no family members came forward to claim his body. He was buried by the Irish Prison Service in an unmarked grave.
John Shaw.
Well, Shaw is still alive, as we know, and still in
Shaw
custody.
Is still in jail. He'll rot there. They have shown no pity or no remorse for the lives that they snuffed out.
Oh, God.
John Shaw remained in prison, but in recent years he's been applying for parole. And in 2016, aged 71, Shaw made a new application to get temporary release from prison, as detailed in the Irish Examiner.
In April 2016, the Prison Review Committee noted Shaw was very frustrated that he has never got a day out of prison in his 38 years in custody.
In those 38 years, he had only ever received one family visit.
In June 2016, a risk assessment of Shaw found him to be at a high-level risk of reoffending. Areas of particular concern were deviant sexual preference, hostility towards women, general social rejection and lack of concern for others.
Despite this, the Parole Board recommended Shaw be granted 2 days escorted outings per year. The Minister for Justice did object, but Shaw was eventually granted the 2 days annual release by the Supreme Court in 2020. Something that Elizabeth's sister Kathleen was all too aware of.
There's a picture of him sitting in Stephen's Green having an ice cream. And I live just up the road from Stephen's Green.
You'll see it, yeah.
I don't know what newspaper that was.
Mary Duffy's sister Anne was also upset, seeing Shaw on temporary day release.
And to think that he can get his freedom and walk free and have a grin on his face, and I can't understand how he was allowed to get that freedom, particularly under the Plunkett family, where they're living like that should never, never have happened.
But now, prisoner John Shaw wants even more. He wants to be released for good. I'm Roz Purcell. From RT Documentary on One, this is Stolen Sister. Episode 6, Irrelevant Victims. And remember, this series contains upsetting content. Throughout the last 40 years, the prison service kept the Plunkett family up to date on the movements of Shaw and Evans within the prison system. Elizabeth's oldest brother, Eddie, was the point of contact.
The prison people were very good to me, with correspondence for 10, 15, 20 years in regards to the movement, and if they were going to the hospital on any of the days, releases or whatever.
Then, in 2023, the Plunkett family got a call.
What was it, last April? February? Eddie got a phone call.
From the Parole Board requested a submission from the Plunkett family.
The Parole Board considers parole applications from prisoners serving life sentences. And because John Shaw was trying to get out of prison, the Parole Board contacted the Plunkett family.
We wouldn't be here, only that Parole Board contacted us and asked us. We would not be here.
Bernie received a letter.
Dear Bernadette, I'm writing to ask if you'd like to register as a victim with the Parole Board.
I sincerely apologise if this letter is unwelcome and causes you distress.
The letter explained that as the family of a victim, the Plunketts could take part in the parole process and have a say in it.
Registering as a victim gives you an opportunity to give your views to the Parole Board on why you think a prisoner should or should not be given parole and possible conditions that you would like.
You see, if he gets parole, you're allowed to say, I don't want him in our county. We don't want him in Dublin. He could leave whatever prison and get a flat or whatever and be rambling around Dublin.
You don't have to make a submission if you don't want to. It's your decision. Yours sincerely.
Bernie rang me and said, what do you think? And I said, well, I will if you will. You know, this kind of way.
The Plunketts were allocated free legal aid to help deal with their submissions to the Parole Board.
My name is Amy McCummesky.
Amy was a solicitor with James McGill and Company, and Amy was assigned the case.
At that stage, we asked Kathleen and Bernadette to come into the office.
She explained everything to us. We went through, we got all the paperwork in, documents signed, you have to register as a victim, we did all that.
Their family had always been very private when it came to discussing their sister Elizabeth. So I think it was quite difficult for Kathleen and Bernadette to be faced with having to put their feelings down on paper.
The feelings we had when somebody actually said to us, can you make a submission? That was the first time anybody ever asked us to put pen to paper to say how we really felt.
You don't allow yourself to think of things because it makes you so sad. And then when somebody asks you to say, how did you feel at the time? And it's like somebody splitting your head open. It's traumatic, isn't it, Bernie? It really was.
We prepared their statement, it was in their own words, because they were very definite that they didn't want John Shaw to be released on parole.
So there's 4 submissions that we made was mental, physical, legal, and this way, how it affects you that way.
When Elizabeth died, it completely changed her family. Bernie was 18.
Our confidence changed, felt so insecure, didn't we? Yeah. I remember somebody even saying to me, why have you this wall? It's very hard to break down the wall you have.
14-year-old Kathleen found parts of her life hard to manage.
I said this in my submissions that I had a very short fuse. I had a ball of anger and I found it very hard to keep friends because I'd snap. Like I couldn't regulate my feelings as a 14-year-old. Our life was chaos.
But life had to move on for Elizabeth's siblings. And as the decades passed, there were marriages, careers, children, and more recently, grandchildren.
We've had to get on with our lives. It's been extremely difficult.
Married, you're still married. My marriage broke up. Had our children, and our children now know
are getting affected by the stories. Yeah.
So this was the depth of feeling that Bernie and Kathleen put into their submission to the Parole Board.
I kind of put my heart and soul into it because I thought it would really help, and I pulled myself inside out. Very personal things in there, which I deeply regret.
Because the prisoner gets to read them.
Bernie and Kathleen wrote their submissions in the knowledge that John Shaw was allowed to read all of what they submitted. That's just part of the process.
And then we had a meeting over in the Parole Boards.
Yeah, we met
a lovely lady and a gentleman and sat in front of them and thought, that's it, we've done our very best now.
There's no way he'll get parole.
That was April 2023. Then, a few months later, solicitor Amy McCummesky received alarming news.
In August 23, I received a phone call from the Parole Board to say that there was an error in the information that they had been provided with, in fairness.
Dear Ms McCummesky, re your clients Bernadette Barry and Kathleen Nolan. Application for parole by John Shaw.
Remember, Elizabeth's siblings grew up believing that John Shaw had been convicted on all charges relating to their sister Elizabeth. And on top of that, somewhere in the state records, it was written that Shaw was in prison for Elizabeth's murder. Until now.
We get a letter to say it has come to our attention that Shaw...
The attention of the Parole Board that it was informed in error by An Garda Síochána that John Shaw was convicted of the murders of both Ms Elizabeth Plunkett and Ms Mary Duffy.
As we told you in the last episode, what we now know happened is that the DPP had at some stage in the late 1970s entered a nolle prosequi, suspending the trial against John Shaw on all charges relating to Elizabeth.
It got to the stage that the lie was told so many times that everybody believes it's true. You know, they're in jail for Liz. They're not. Not one day has been served for Elizabeth in all that time. The lie was so well established that even the parole board themselves didn't know about it.
This wasn't the only shock Bernie and Kathleen were in for.
The parole board was also in error, provided with information regarding your clients being relevant victims, being relatives of Elizabeth Plunkett.
The term relevant victims is set out in the 2019 Parole Act, and with no conviction, it meant Elizabeth's family were no longer considered victims.
Unfortunately, this meant that the Plunkett family would be excluded from the process and their voice wouldn't be heard in challenging John Shaw's application for parole.
The parole board tell us that we're irrelevant victims.
We're awfully sorry, but your input and the family input is not required by law.
The parole board sincerely regrets that this error occurred. I am very aware of the inevitable upset caused to your clients.
To be told that you can't be involved in it was such a shock, wasn't it, Kathleen? Like a slap in the face at the time.
It was like, it took me like 2 or 4 days, you know, to think, what am I, like, if the parole board hadn't come near us, they have invited us to take part in a process. One of the hardest things I've ever done in my life, and we did it out of duty. He got away with Elizabeth's murder. And we're supposed to go and say, well, OK, thanks very much, and walk away and leave it like that. So we won't be able to do that.
James, Amy and everyone legally involved in representing the Plunketts agreed to continue helping the family for no charge.
They were shocked, and James' words were, you're being treated appallingly.
I was anxious to say this isn't the end of the road. We will look into this. We would do our best to try and find out exactly what had happened, to give them some answers.
Managing partner James McGill could see that there were many outstanding issues.
Was it simply that they didn't feel there was a need for a further conviction? Was it a resource issue? Was it a legal ruling? You know, none of this stuff was clear.
Very, very grateful. Oh my God, like we wouldn't really be able to go forward with anything without their advice.
The search for answers led Bernie and Kathleen to our door too.
It was my father's wish that we would discuss it. It's a private matter, let Elizabeth rest in peace. But we can't let her rest in peace now, because there is no peace. Do you know, there's no conviction. So it's like she didn't matter.
Bernie and Kathleen have this right is right and wrong is wrong. And Elizabeth has been wronged.
I know with every shred that if what happened to her happened to one of us, any of us, like a brother, sister, she would absolutely leave no stone unturned. She was formidable. She would just do what was the right thing to do, and she would, without question. So I know in my heart that this is exactly what she would do.
But there was more to come. We were hoping to find out what Elizabeth's cause of death is registered as. It's usually written on the death certificate. So producer Liam got in touch with Kathleen.
And he said, have you got a death certificate? And I said, oh. And I text Bernie and she said, I never saw a death certificate. I said, neither did I. Gets back on to Liam and Liam says, leave it with me. I can order it online. And then he got back and said he's tried every combination of name and date of birth, and there is no death certificate. And that we were going, what? We were shocked.
We checked the official records and they confirmed that no death certificate was ever issued for Elizabeth. The reason there was no death certificate was revealed to Bernie and Kathleen in James McGill's legal office in Dublin. Normally, an inquest is always held when there is an unusual death. Solicitor James McGill went looking for the inquest details.
The current coroner for Wexford has been very helpful, and we can now confirm that the inquest was never held. There's no explanation coming forward for that.
All of this means that there is no official record of Elizabeth even dying, let alone that she died at the hands of another person.
How could she go through all of that and then no inquest, no death certificate, no conviction. It's the worst thing ever. The procedures that normally happen did not happen for Elizabeth. All the things that a citizen is entitled to, they were not afforded to Elizabeth. Elizabeth's literally wiped out. It's like she never existed and she doesn't matter. Like that, I can't.
Can't live with that.
I can't live with myself.
Somewhere down along the lines, Elizabeth was being erased from everything. She'd no voice. This won't do.
And so, the Plunketts are left with questions.
We need answers to why there was no inquest and why there was no death certificate.
We don't know how far our information got to John Shaw because the prisoner can read everything you've written.
Why are these guys not guilty of the murder of my sister?
We really need to find out why there was no conviction.
In our last episode, we told you that the DPP had entered a nolle prosequi for John Shaw on all charges relating to Elizabeth. But no one knows why. A nolle is not an acquittal. It is a stay on a prosecution, so the case can be reopened, especially if new information or witnesses come forward. Elizabeth's family want to see John Shaw going on trial for what he did to Elizabeth.
I would prefer a trial and a proper conviction and to be part of the parole process legally the way it should have been from the beginning.
Bernie and Kathleen reached out to a number of government agencies to highlight their situation and get answers about why there was no conviction for Elizabeth. Every single reply turned them away.
Dear Mr McGill, I refer to your correspondence to the Minister for Justice, Miss Helen McEntee.
I refer to your request for an internal review under the Freedom of Information Act.
There is nothing arising at this point in time for the Minister to consider. Yours sincerely,
I have
Secretary
now made the decision to refuse your request under Section 37(1).
There is no right under Section 8 to be provided with such information.
Sincerely, Assistant Principal Officer, Irish Prison Service.
This is a matter for the DPP. There is no ongoing investigation at present in respect of the murder of Elizabeth Plunkett. Yours faithfully, Chief State Solicitor.
Every department wants to just brush us aside.
Yeah. We've tried every avenue. We have tried every single thing we can.
In November 2024, we at RT Documentary on One also sent letters to each of the relevant government agencies that Kathleen and Bernie had contacted, including the Director of Public Prosecutions, the Garda Commissioner and the Minister for Justice, and we received some replies.
To your letter dated 18th of November 2024, addressed to Ms Catherine Pearce, Director of Public Prosecutions.
When we asked the DPP why a nolle prosequi had been entered on all charges relating to Elizabeth by John Shaw, they told us the laws back then meant they didn't have to tell families why. The law has changed now, but they still won't tell the family.
In accordance with Section 4 of the Act, the right to request reasons does not apply retrospectively.
The DPP also said they won't be taking any action against John Shaw unless they receive new information from An Garda Síochána.
New proceedings would only be considered at this stage if the office was to receive a new Garda investigation file, which identified sufficient evidence to provide a reasonable prospect of a successful prosecution of an identified suspect.
And this is why it's so important for new witnesses listening to this series to come forward with any new information they might have about John Shaw and Jeffrey Evans. This is Kathleen and Bernie's only hope for something to change.
They're all blaming each other. All the departments in government are blaming each other that, oh no, that wasn't our fault, that was yours.
By the end of 2024, as Bernie and Kathleen had been hitting nothing but brick walls with government agencies and were still awaiting news of the inquest, they met up with their local TD, Ivana Bacik.
Elizabeth's family, constituents of mine, have asked me now to make public their plight today. And they've asked me, Taoiseach, to make a specific request of you, that the government would commit to providing sufficient resources to enable the coroner in Wexford, where Elizabeth's body was found, to carry out the long overdue inquest without delay.
Thank you. Taoiseach. I want to thank Deputy Bacik for raising this important and sensitive issue, and I can only imagine the pain of the Plunkett family still looking for answers and information all these years on.
Letters and phone calls went back and forth. The coroner was told by An Garda Síochána that they didn't have relevant files. But fortunately, we were able to provide the coroner with the files he needed to proceed with an inquest. And then finally, just before Christmas, Solicitor James McGill heard from the Wexford coroner.
We were very lucky that Dr. Nixon, coroner for Wexford, really got engaged by this oversight and started to retrieve the available records, including Professor Harbinson's post-mortem report, and other files were then reviewed by senior Gardaí in the Wexford district, who were all very helpful.
An inquest was finally going to be held into Elizabeth's death in January 2025.
We got the email from James, and it said that the coroner wanted to pick a date in January.
For the first time in almost 2 years, it's actually the news you wanted to hear.
Straight out of Ringsend, straight ahead, Sean.
January 24th, 2025. Bernie and Kathleen are back on the road down to Wexford again.
It's like being brought back to 1976 when we picked up Elizabeth's remains in Wexford from the hospital. So this is how we find ourselves today, going to an inquest 49 years later. Yeah.
It's a bit surreal, Bernie, isn't it? Like, yeah. It's a positive. And you know, it's a very positive, sad thing. You know.
Elizabeth is there with us today. We feel her presence, and we hope we're doing her proud, and we'll get this sorted.
After everything he'd been told, Dr. Sean Nixon was determined to make this inquest happen.
And when this was brought to my attention in 2024, we then looked to hold an inquest, and it did take some time to try and gain the evidence based on the lapse of time, almost 50 years. And fortunately, this has come to completion today.
The coroner ruled the death as unlawful killing and recorded the cause as death by strangulation. Elizabeth's sisters and brother Eddie were present.
We're outside the courthouse after the inquest for Elizabeth. It was dealt with in a very, very humane and sympathetic hearing. Long overdue, and there are still a lot of questions to be answered.
So dignified and so respectful to the family, and for hear the coroner to say those words, we were really grateful. But we're happy today, aren't we, Katie? Sad but happy today that we have this done.
To hear the verdict read out of unlawful killing was like, you know, I had to kind of pinch myself to hear the words officially said. So this gives us a legal standing, and it gives Elizabeth the dignity of a death certificate that she never had. And when you hear other people use the words, it's surreal. I could feel myself lifting up out of my body and just trying to hang on and just, you know, bear witness to all that was being said. And I'm shaking from head to toe, but I feel the weight of the world off my shoulders.
After hearing about Elizabeth, after suffering the way she did and the way her life was taken, that they could really empathise with us to say nobody should leave this world under those circumstances.
You know, it was kind of like, because it's a court, it felt like a ceremony. It felt like, you know, like your death, your baptism, your wedding, your funeral, and it was like, that's your time. And she got her time today. It honoured her.
The inquest became national news, featuring on many news outlets.
This afternoon, a verdict of unlawful killing was returned at an inquest in Gorey in County Wexford. Producer with RTE Documentary on One, Nicoline Greer, was at the inquest.
The fact that the inquest concluded today meant that a death certificate for Elizabeth was also issued, and the cause of death was recorded officially as asphyxiation.
But as for holding someone responsible for Elizabeth's death, and Gardaí to do a cold case review, that's what the Plunkett family really want now. Justice. And that may well happen now, because as this series has been publishing, over a dozen witnesses have come forward with new information about John Shaw and Jeffrey Evans.
We crouched down inside the wall and could hear the car stop at the other side of the wall. We could hear them saying something in English accents and walking around.
And said, "Hi, we're going your way, we're hopping and we give you a lift." And I said, "Excuse me?"
I thought, yeah, right.
And I was 12 and a half years old. He followed and kept chatting to me all the while.
All of these new witnesses and all of what they have to tell is coming in our 7th and final episode.
And I said to him, "What do you want?" Like that. I roared at him. And all he said to me was one word. You.
Stolen Sister is narrated by me, Roz Purcell. The music is by Oscar-winning composer Stephen Warbeck and performed by the RTE Concert Orchestra.
And sound design and orchestra recordings are by me, Ciarán Dunn.
Production assistance is by me, Shauna McGreevy.
And me, Tim Desmond.
And the series is written and produced by me, Nicoline Greer.
Readings in this episode were by Ronan Kelly. The executive producer is Liam O'Brien. If you've been affected by any issues raised in this episode, please visit rte.ie/helplines. Join us next time for our final episode. Until then, thanks for listening.